Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, September 5th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, Romania denies that a Russian drone hit its territory. So NATO member Romania has strongly denied a Ukrainian claim that a Russian drone detonated in Romanian territory during an overnight bombardment on one of Ukraine's ports on the Danube River. So this claim was initially made by a Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesman who wrote on Facebook that according to Ukraine's State Border Service, a Russian drone fell and detonated on the territory of Romania during an attack on the Ukrainian port of Izmail. And this was an attack that took place overnight, Sunday into Monday. So this Ukrainian official said, quote, "This is yet another confirmation that Russia's missile terror poses a huge threat not only to Ukraine's security, but also to the security of neighboring countries, including NATO member states," end quote. So Romania's defense ministry quickly refuted the claim, and again, they strongly denied this claim that was made by the Ukrainians, which has all sorts of implications because Romania is a NATO country. So the Romanian defense ministry said, quote, "The Ministry of National Defense categorically denies information from the public space regarding a so-called situation that occurred during the night of September 3rd to 4th in which Russian drones allegedly fell on the national territory of Romania," end quote. I put in a map on the story here, just a screenshot from Google Maps to show where this port is, this Izmail port in Ukraine, right across the Danube River, which acts as a border between Ukraine and Romania. Measuring it on Google Maps is just over 1,000 feet across from NATO territory. So, the Russian strikes on these ports certainly do raise a big risk of escalation. And there's definitely concerns about Russian drones or Ukrainian air defenses hitting Romanian territory. But again, Romania is strongly denying this. The Romanian Defense Ministry added that, quote, "At no time did the means of attack used by the Russian Federation generate direct military threats to the national territory or the territorial waters of Romania," end quote. So Ukrainian officials have previously made unfounded claims about Russian munitions hitting NATO territory. If you remember last year, a Ukrainian air defense missile landed in Poland and killed 2 people. And this story initially broke. The Ukrainians were claiming that it was a Russian missile and that it was an intentional attack. They were telling NATO to intervene directly. And they got a little help. I don't know if you remember, this story last year initially broke as by AP, and they reported that a U.S. official said it was a Russian missile that hit Poland. It was pretty scary when that came out because, again, this is the big risk of this war of the, NATO being expanded to Russia and Ukraine's border is that it risks drawing in, accidents like this or, who knows, intentional things could happen as well. But it turned out, luckily at the time, President Biden came out and said, no, it looks like it was a Ukrainian air defense missile, and Poland pretty quickly said that was the case. And, NATO has all sorts of missile defense and radar systems, on the border there. So they probably knew immediately that it was not a Russian missile that hit Poland. So we always have to keep that in mind with these stories, is that Ukraine does have the incentive to try to get NATO to intervene directly, even though that risks World War III and nuclear war. But for Ukrainian leadership, they don't seem concerned about that. They just want, they would be happy to provoke a direct war between NATO and Russia. But still, it's definitely just an area of concern, these Russian attacks on these Danube River ports. All right, the next one here. Putin tells Erdogan that Russia will rejoin the grain deal if sanctions are eased. So Russian President Vladimir Putin met with Turkish President Erdogan on Monday and said that Moscow would return to the Black Sea grain deal if sanctions against Russia's agricultural industry are lifted. So Putin said after the talks with the Turkish leader, which were in Sochi, Russia, he said, quote, "I would like to confirm again our position of principle. We will be ready to consider the opportunity of reviving the grain deal. I told Erdogan today again, and will do this immediately after all arrangements set in on lifting of restrictions on Russian agricultural exports are fulfilled," end quote. So one of Russia's main demands to revive the deal is reconnecting the Russian Agricultural Bank to the SWIFT payment system. SWIFT is this international messaging system for financial transactions. And the U.S. and Western sanctions have cut off some Russian banks from that system. And a few days before this meeting between Putin and Erdogan, the Turkish media reported that the UN actually proposed reconnecting the European subsidiary of this Russian agricultural bank to the SWIFT system. And they also recommended unfreezing assets of Russian companies producing fertilizers in Europe. But easing these sanctions would require action from the U.S. and its European allies. And the Western powers are denying that sanctions are impeding Russian exports. They point to the fact that Russia has been exporting a lot of grain and stuff like that. I know their fertilizer exports have taken a hit from these sanctions. But even when it comes to sanctions, they put exemptions on things like food and medicine, but sanctions still impact those shipments. That's just the nature of them because, if Russian shipping is sanctioned with an exemption, a lot of, banks and international businesses, they just won't bother to do business with, Russian shipping companies. They don't want to have to worry about sanctions. So Erdogan said after the meeting that he expects an agreement on the matter to be reached soon. He sounded kind of positive, like the grain deal might be revived. He said, quote, "As Turkey, we believe that we will reach a solution that will meet the expectations in a short time," end quote. So in the meantime, Putin said that Russia would export 1 million tons of grain to Turkey, where it will be processed and then shipped to poorer nations for free. So the grain deal, basically what it did is it facilitated the export of Ukrainian grain out of Ukraine's Black Sea ports by establishing these humanitarian corridors that Russia agreed to be responsible for the security of these ships coming in and out. And Putin reiterated his reasons for exiting the deal. He said that the West didn't live up to its end of easing sanctions, and Russia has accused Ukraine of using these humanitarian corridors to launch attacks. So since the grain deal was suspended in July, Russia has really stepped up its bombardment of Ukraine's ports, both on the Black Sea and the Danube River. So that's the situation. And, it seems like the U.S. and the European countries are not going to budge on this issue of easing sanctions on Russia, but maybe the UN will be able to pressure them enough to do so. We will see. All right, so the next one here, breaking through Russia's defenses is only the first step for Ukraine. So this is actually an article from the Wall Street Journal that we're running because I thought it was interesting. And basically what it says, it quotes a former retired U.S. Army general and some Ukrainian officials that they speak to who say, we see all this talk about recently Ukraine has been claiming that they're starting to punch through Russia's, first defensive line in the southern Zaporozhye region. But this kind of explores, okay, so what's next? Say they do punch through that line. And it's also important to note that while Ukraine is saying that, you have all the Russian media reports on this that I'm seeing at least are, Russia is saying that they're inflicting very heavy losses on the Ukrainians that are fighting in these areas. In these two towns, one is called Robotyne and the other is called Verbov. I might be pronouncing those wrong. But anyway, So, but this article gets into, okay, so say they do break through that line, what's next? And they're going to have to hold that line. And it discusses how difficult that would be for these Ukrainian soldiers. They would have to fill every gap around them. It's interesting. It's something I haven't really talked about much. I haven't really thought about much. Okay, so say they do break through all these Russian defensive lines. Can they hold the positions? And this article raises a lot of doubt on that possibility. And again, they speak with Ukrainian officials. So I think it's just another sign that this Ukrainian counteroffensive has failed, because even if they punch through in this one area, the likelihood that they can hold it, I think, is pretty slim. All right. But the U.S. is pushing them to keep going harder anyway. They just want to keep this war going. They don't care about the Ukrainian casualties or anything like that. I think that's very clear at this point. All right, the next one here. South Africa says that an inquiry found no evidence of arms shipments to Russia. So on Sunday, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said that an independent inquiry found no evidence that a Russian cargo ship that docked in South Africa last year was loaded with weapons, despite claims from the U.S. So this Russian ship, the Lady R, it docked at a naval base near Cape Town in December 2022, and this angered the United States because the vessel is under U.S. sanctions. And without evidence, a few months ago, the U.S. ambassador to South Africa, Ruben Brigady, claimed that he knew the ship was loaded with weapons, saying he would bet his life on the assertion. So it's a real taste of U.S.-style diplomacy, just making this accusation with no evidence, presenting no evidence. So Ramaphosa said, quote, "The panel found no evidence that any cargo of weapons was loaded for export onto the ship. None of the persons who made these allegations could provide any evidence to support the claims made against our country," end quote. And he said that the inquiry investigation into this was led by a retired South African judge. And he's saying that the Lady R docked at this naval base to deliver equipment that had been ordered for South Africa's military in 2018. He said that the accusations hurt South Africa's economy and that it called into question the country's neutrality policy related to the war in Ukraine. So, of course, South Africa was not happy about the U.S. making this accusation. And this U.S. ambassador said that it would be unacceptable for South Africa to provide arms to Russia. And what South African officials said at the time when he made the accusation was that they agreed, with the U.S. to, do an investigation into this and then take it from there. But despite that, the U.S. ambassador still came public with those allegations. And in response to Ramaphosa's news about this investigation, a spokesman for the U.S. Embassy in South Africa said that the U.S. will let South Africa speak for its panel's conclusion, whatever that means. And the U.S., South Africa is neutral in the war, but they have an economic relationship with Russia that the U.S. does not like. And we know that they've gone to extreme measures over neutrality in the Ukraine war. Thanks to that recent report from The Intercept that revealed last year the U.S. pressured Pakistan to hold a no-confidence vote to oust Imran Khan because of his aggressive neutrality, as the Americans called it. Somehow neutrality is aggressive. Okay, so the next one here, this is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. A report says that Russia, China, and North Korea will hold trilateral war games. So South Korea's intelligence services believe that Russia, China, and North Korea are preparing to hold a joint military drill. And he points out that Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang have all frequently complained about American war games near their borders. So according to a South Korean legislator, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu likely proposed that North Korean soldiers join Russian and Chinese troops for military exercises when he met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un back in July. This South Korean official says that he learned the information during a closed-door discussion with South Korea's National Intelligence Service. So if this is true, and there are indications from what Shoigu actually said himself on Monday that this probably is true, it's not really a surprise. This is just the reaction to what the U.S. has been doing. when we talk about North Korea, as I've been covering, the U.S. and South Korea have restarted these huge war games near North Korea's border, and they're forming this trilateral alliance with Japan, South Korea, and the U.S. So, of course, they're not happy about that. So on Saturday, actually, so this was this past Saturday, the Russian envoy in Pyongyang explained that North Korea's participation in joint military exercises with China and Russia was an appropriate response to constant bilateral and trilateral exercises being held by the U.S. and its junior partners in Asia. And then on Monday, Shoigu confirmed that Moscow was planning to conduct at least joint military drills with Pyongyang. That doesn't necessarily mean they would be trilateral with China. But he added that Kim was planning to travel to Russia for an upcoming meeting with Putin. So Kim Jong-un is making a rare trip out of North Korea to hold talks with Putin. All right, so I just want to mention again, it is our fundraiser at antiwar.com, and things are going very well for us, and we really appreciate the support, but we still need to make a final push to finish this thing. And if you go to antiwar.com/donate, you can see the different ways you can support us. Matching funds are still in effect, so every dollar that you give will be doubled. So again, antiwar.com/donate to help us finish that off. And we still have a letter from John Mearsheimer at the top of the page, who's been a very important voice in all this Ukraine madness. He's been predicting something like this for years. And, he gets his lectures and things on the issue get a lot of attention, which of course is good. So again, help us with that. And the next news story here, the U.S. and the Philippines conduct a joint patrol in the South China Sea. So the U.S. and Philippine navies conducted a joint patrol in the disputed South China Sea on Monday, and this is a step that increases the chance of a dangerous encounter between U.S. and Chinese vessels. So the U.S. Navy's Japan-based 7th Fleet said that the guided missile destroyer USS Ralph Johnson joined the Philippine guided missile frigate BRP Jose Rizal for a bilateral sail. So this has kind of been a long time coming. It's something I've covered, that the U.S. and the Philippines said earlier this year that they were going to do joint patrols in the South China Sea. So the 7th Fleet said in a statement, quote, "During the sail, the ships completed division tactics, which is at-sea training designed for ship handlers to practice maneuvering within close proximity to other vessels and improve the confidence of the bridge teams to manage more challenging sailing conditions," end quote. So the joint patrol comes after the commander of the 7th Fleet, Vice Admiral Carl Thomas, said that the U.S. must challenge China in the South China Sea. The Philippine military's Western Command said that this marked the first time Washington and Manila conducted joint naval patrols west of Palawan. And Palawan is a Philippine island province on the South China Sea. If you see this map here, it's kind of this long, skinny island at the edge of where China makes its claims. And they said that the event was an opportunity for the Philippine Navy and the U.S. Indo-Pacific Navy to test and refine existing maritime doctrine. And this patrol comes at a time of very high tensions in the region. Chinese and Philippine vessels have had several tense standoffs recently near Second Thomas Shoal, which is a reef claimed by both sides. In one incident on August 5th, the Chinese Coast Guard fired a water cannon toward Philippine boats trying to resupply a grounded ship on the reef. The U.S. has repeatedly affirmed that the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty applies to attacks on Philippine boats in the South China Sea, meaning the U.S. will intervene if the spat between Beijing and Manila turns hot. So if they start shooting at each other, the U.S. says that it's going to intervene and go to war with China over this maritime dispute. So very far from the United States. All right, so the next one here, an IAEA report shows that Iran has slowed its enrichment of 60% uranium. So a report from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, which is the UN's nuclear watchdog, this report shows that Iran has slowed its enrichment of uranium at 60% purity. So Iran began enriching uranium at 60% in response to an Israeli attack on the Natanz nuclear facility in April 2021. And Israel bombed that facility while the U.S. and Iran restarted negotiations. It was a pretty clear attempt to sabotage those negotiations. So the level of 60% is the highest uranium enrichment that Iran has done, but it is still well below the 90% purity that's needed for weapons-grade uranium. And there's still no sign that Iran is planning to build a nuclear bomb despite all the hype. And this was recently reaffirmed by a U.S. intelligence report. So according to the IAEA report, which was obtained by AP, Iran has 121 kilograms of uranium enriched at 60%, compared with just over 114 kilograms in May. So it's a slow growth, and it means that Iran's stockpile of 60% enriched uranium is growing at its slowest pace since it started in 2021. And having uranium enriched at 60%, having a stockpile of that, you can't build a bomb with it. So this is all kind of overhyped by the media, but I think it's worth explaining once in a while. So the revelation comes as the U.S. and Iran have been working to exchange prisoners in a deal that will also give Iran some access to its frozen funds that are held in South Korea. It's Iran's own money. Earlier this year, a series of reports said that the U.S. and Iran were close to an interim nuclear deal that would involve Iran stopping 60% enrichment and receiving some sanctions relief. But an agreement never materialized. But maybe this slow growth of their stockpile signals that there still might be some kind of deal to be had. And because of all the opposition in Congress from Iran hawks, from the American hardliners, the Biden administration's dealing with Iran are generally kept secret. So it's unclear if there is a potential deal on the table related to this nuclear activity. And Iran hawks in both the United States and Israel, they always point to Iran's uranium enrichment as evidence that the Iranians are racing to build a bomb, but they both oppose the 2015 nuclear deal known as the JCPOA, which capped Iran's enrichment at 3.67%, so very low enriched uranium. And it also made their nuclear program subject to the most stringent inspections in the world, yet they oppose it. They oppose it really because the other end of the deal is sanctions being lifted on Iran, which they don't want. And again, when we always talk about Iran's nuclear program, it's always worth pointing out that Israel has a secret nuclear weapons program that they don't talk about, that the U.S. does not acknowledge exists. It's always missing from the conversation in Western media. So always try to make a point to bring that up. Because Israel is always the one accusing Iran of making a bomb, and they say it'll start a regional arms race, but Israel already has nukes. All right, so the next one here, a Palestinian Authority delegation to discuss Israel normalization in Riyadh. So this article is from Middle East Eye, and they cite sources who said that a Palestinian Authority delegation will discuss Ramallah's role in a possible Saudi Arabia-Israel normalization deal in an upcoming meeting with American and Saudi officials in Riyadh. So the delegation will travel to Saudi Arabia on Monday, and it includes PA President Mahmoud Abbas's deputy and other officials, and they will hold discussions with Saudi Arabia's foreign minister and national security advisor, and they will also meet with Brett McGurk, who is President Biden's top Middle East official on the National Security Council. According to Palestinian sources with knowledge of the trip, the PA officials will discuss issues raised by Saudi Arabia about the possible normalization deal without presenting specific demands. So it's interesting that they're going over there because it seems like the ball might be rolling towards some sort of deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which the Biden administration is pushing for. And the PA, the Palestinians are not happy with the PA these days. They look at them as a puppet of Israel and a puppet of the United States. So it's not really a surprise to see them, discussing this with the Saudis. Because we know, what Saudi Arabia wants out of the United States for this deal with Israel is security guarantees similar to NATO style, an attack. They want the U.S. to treat an attack on Saudi Arabia as an attack on the U.S. So they're really asking for a lot there, and it seems like the U.S. might be willing to give it to them. So it's definitely not going to be good for us if that is the case. And apparently, in response, the Israelis are saying that they want security guarantees as well, even more than they get through the military aid from the U.S. All right, the last one here is another story from Middle East Eye, and it says that Germany ends training of Saudi border forces after alleged atrocities. So Germany has ended a training program for Saudi border forces implicated in the alleged mass killing of migrants at the border with Yemen. In a statement to The Guardian, the German Interior Ministry said the program had been discontinued following reports of massive human rights violations by Saudi border forces. So the recent report from Human Rights Watch said that Saudi border forces killed hundreds of Ethiopian migrants attempting to cross the border into Saudi Arabia from Yemen, and that there was deliberate mass killings going on. And there's been other reports that say that, and we know the Saudis have no gripes about killing civilians. They did it in Yemen for years in that war with, the full backing of the United States. So the U.S. also trained these Saudi border forces. I know the U.S. officials are claiming that the funding for that training stopped earlier this year, but the U.S. is still totally backing the Saudis militarily. And, they're considering now giving them these new strong security guarantees. I remember, so there still haven't been any Saudi airstrikes in Yemen since February 2022, or maybe it was March that ceasefire went into effect. Actually, I think the ceasefire went into effect in April. So there's been no Saudi airstrikes in Yemen since March 2022. One of the last big Saudi airstrikes in Yemen was in January 2022 when the Saudis bombed a migrant detention facility in Yemen that killed over 90 civilians that were in there. So, with this new report, coming out, makes me wonder, was that intentional? Did they mean to kill 90-something migrants so, it lessened the chances of them showing up at the border? I think it's certainly a possibility. So, yeah, and again, I don't see that this report and these killings really impacting the U.S.-Saudi relationship too much. But that is it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Lawrence Whitner, from the partial test ban treaty to a nuclear weapons-free world. One from Ted Snyder, A Tale of Two Coups. One from Bryce Green over at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, How to Ignore 4.5 Million Deaths. That's about how the media barely reported on this study from the Brown University's Costs of War project that found the U.S. post 9/11 terror wars contributed to 4.5 million deaths. And they're known to, have very conservative estimates, the Costs of War project. So really horrific. One from Brad Pierce at his Substack, Gabon joins the coup club, and some very in-depth analysis of the coup in Gabon. And our spotlight today, we kept up the John Mearsheimer piece from yesterday, Bound to Lose, Ukraine's 2023 Counteroffensive. We kept that up there because we still have the letter from him. Go check out our blog. We posted my appearance on Part of the Problem, which is Dave Smith's podcast. You can go watch that on YouTube or listen to the audio version. It was a good conversation we had, mostly about China. It was all about China, actually, talking about the risk of a direct war, what it would really mean, a direct war over Taiwan. So I thought that was a good conversation to have with him. And I know there's some new listeners and viewers of this show from Dave Smith's show, so welcome, and it's good to have you. But that's everything. Again, another reminder that this is going to be a short week for me. I'm only doing 3 shows. We have a new baby to bring into this world, and C-section is scheduled. So there will be no Thursday and Friday show. I'm expecting to be able to do a show, record a show Sunday night to put out a show for Monday next week. There's always a chance that might not happen. Just want to keep you in the loop. And I'll definitely remind you, in the next show, because it's going to be the last one of this week. But again, help us with our fundraiser. If you can't do that, you could always help us out by liking, subscribing, sharing the show, telling your friends about antiwar.com, just helping us get the word out. And so I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.